Hello and welcome to this DungeonFog tutorial on room building within DungeonFog. We're going to be using two tools today. We're going to use the Draw Room tool and the Select tool. If you haven't seen the Select tool tutorial video, I suggest you have a look at that before watching this video. Selecting the Draw tool from our toolbox is simply a case of left-clicking on the tool itself. This will open up an option which says Room, so we know that we're building a room. And then we've got Wall Type, Floor, Wall, and then Outer Wall and Inner Wall Thickness. To create a room, we simply take our cursor, and notice now we get a red dot that aligns itself with the vector points, or the vertex points, I should say, of the grid. This is where we're going to start building our room. So I'm going to make a room very quickly, and that's by left-clicking once. Notice now that I get a red line that is drawn from my first vector point. I can now click anywhere on the map and create another vector point to start creating walls and ultimately to create my room. Something that's important to notice is the red numbers underneath the vertex point as I move it around the map. What this is doing is it's telling me that the vertex point that I'm about to place is 3 units away from the original vertex point that I created, and when you look at the brackets values, this indicates how far over the actual vertex point is. It is on the same line as the vertex point, hence having a 0, and then the second line indicates it's 3 away. So if I were to move the vertex point over by 2, it would now indicate that I'm 2 blocks over, or 2 grid spacings over from my original vertex point. I'm still 3 points down. But notice now that first number has changed. It's now 3.61 rather than just 2. The reason for that, it is actually calculating the distance between those 2 points. And of course, it's using specific mathematical formula to do that. We'll talk more about how these mathematical formula can be changed or used in your game to help you create really accurate spaces. But for now, we're going to create a simple room that's 3 by 3. So in the map scale that I chose of 5 foot per grid, that makes this a 15 foot by 15 foot room. I'm going to create 4 of them as a matter of fact, so that you can accurately see what's going on in this particular tutorial. Now, you can create them however, in whatever shape you like. I am simply left-clicking each time, and please note, when you are ready to finish your room shape, regardless of what shape the room is, your final vertex point has to marry back onto the very first vertex point that you created. Notice that vertex point, when you're going to close the room, that vertex point increases in size slightly to show you that you are going to close the room. So then I left click and I close the room, and it's as simple as that. So these are the rooms that I have created, and we're now going to start manipulating them. We no longer need the Draw Room tool. We're not drawing rooms, now we're changing rooms. So we select the Select tool. That allows us to select our stage, or to left-click and select any one of the rooms. We can select anywhere in the room, and it will automatically highlight with these circles and these lines around our room shape. The more complicated the room, the more of these vertex points we will have, as well as wall segments. So just what does this mean? Well, let's look at the circles first. The outer circle, which is on every vertex point, is slightly transparent, and notice when I mouse over it, it changes color to a slightly darker orange. These allow me to reposition the room. Depending on which one I click on, it depends on the alignment of the room. So if I left click on this bottom circle down here, and I'm going to left click and drag, so that's left clicking and keeping the left click depressed, I can drag the room wherever I like on the point that I have selected. So in other words, I'm moving it around that lower right hand point. If I select the top left-hand corner, when I move the room around, the effect is still the same. I'm still left-clicking and dragging, but now my alignment is according to this left upper circle that I'm using. The central circle, notice when I mouse over that, the central point, that is my actual vertex point. If I left-click and then drag, I'm now changing the actual shape of my room. Left-click, drag allows me to change that shape. I can do this for all of the vertex points that I might want to change, manipulate, etc., etc. The segment is the line between the 2 vertex points. Notice it goes orange when I select it, and notice that it changes value when I select a wall segment specifically, rather than just the entire room. We're going to come into a little bit more on that in a little bit. Now, when we are drawing our rooms, the vertex points were always snapping to grid. Let me demonstrate that again. So if I am going to draw a room, I cannot create a vector point anywhere off the actual grid. That is by design. If I want to circumnavigate that, all I do is hold down the Shift key, and then the point is no longer fixed to the grid. And I can start to create some really interesting shaped rooms, left-clicking as I create these vertex points. And then finally, as with all room creation, when I get back to the point that I want to finish this room, I can then left-click back on the circle and create a room, or I can let go of Shift and the vertex point will automatically snap back to the first vertex point that I created. As a side note, note that when I am trying to cross a line that I have made already, it goes red. This indicates I'm trying to create an impossible shaped room, and I must choose an alternative method or destination for my room. This is really useful when you might cross your own walls and you don't want to do that. When we are in the selection mode and we select a vertex point, it still snaps to the grid as before. Once again, if I hold down Shift, then left-click and drag, the vertex point is no longer linked to the grid, and I can move it to wherever I want. It's the easiest way to manipulate the shapes of your rooms. If, however, I feel the room looked better on the grid, I let go of the Shift key, and the moment I left-click and drag on the vertex point, it will automatically snap to grid. And I can move it back however I like it. Notice the red walls were giving me indicators that there was going to be violations on the room shape, which DungeonFog does not allow. As with the square rooms, with the cave that I have started to draw here, I can select any of the vertex points, outer circles, and left-click and drag as I so desire to reposition the room. Now that we know how to make rooms and room shapes and how to move our rooms around, I'm just going to give us a little bit of breathing room by moving this over a little bit. We can now start to look at the actual controls that each room comes with. All rooms are standard defaulted to the wall type normal, a floor and wall texture, and an outer wall and inner wall thickness of 4. Before we get going any further though, I always recommend that you name your rooms. To do this, select the room, select the space called room, and then type in the name of the room. Let's call this the dungeon. I press enter to commit the name to DungeonFog. And let's go here and call this theater. I have no idea why. And let's call this throne room. And let's call this treasure room. Finally, we can call this cave. We have the option of inserting a number into each of these spaces. So if I went back to the theater and I typed in the number 1, it's automatically going to create a number on the map. So when I print it out, I might have a key code that I'm working from. The players don't know what the number 1 means, but I can reference that later on. I can go to each room and type in a number. If I don't want the number, however, I simply select the number and delete it, and it's removed. So I select the number and delete it. Each of the rooms is now labeled, so we can now remember what we were going to be doing in each of these particular rooms. That can be really handy when you're coming to place props later on. Let's start working through the wall types. There are 4 wall types in DungeonFog. There's normal, below ground, cave, and advanced. The normal wall type allows us to control all kinds of standard values. Most importantly is our textures. So our floor and our wall currently have a different texture. The floor has a dark grey texture, whereas the walls has a light grey texture. To change this, I simply left-click anywhere on this space that indicates floor or the actual texture. Notice it automatically brings up all of the preloaded textures that DungeonFog ships with. You can add more later, and there's a tutorial on how to do that. For now, however, let's just choose a stone floor. We have the option of gravel, natural stone, roofs, worked stone, and so on. Let's go with, it's a theater, let's go with gravel. Notice it loads up all the different types of gravel that I have, and then when I select one of these options, again, it's just left-clicking all the way, folks, it will change the texture automatically to gravel. The outer wall has not changed. If I left click somewhere else, you'll notice the outer wall is still white. So it is only changing the floor of the room, and it's not changing the floor of the room of any of the others. So let's go with rocks. There we go. That looks like a pretty good courtyard to me. Now, to get rid of this extra panel, all I do is left click on the word floor or on the texture itself. We can change the walls as well in exactly the same process. It's not going to be gravel. Let's say we want that to be made out of worked stone, and we want it to be, let's say, this decorated tiling. So now we have, if I select the room elsewhere, you'll see that we've got this redder wall and then this tiling, very different from the others. Please note that these selections do not change your fundamental Draw Room tool textures. Those you would need to change independently, and you would do exactly the same as you have done when changing the individual rooms. Another thing to bear in mind, let's go to cave for example, is when we change the floor, let's go with ground, and let's say that it's mud. No, let's say dirt might be better. Let's make it brown clay. That looks okay to me for a dungeon floor. I have all of the controls at the bottom down here that I normally work with within DungeonFog. I've got my rotation, my scaling, and then all of my color changing options. If we look at scaling first, if I type in 300%, notice the texture is immediately bigger and bolder, and we can see what's going on. The effect to the viewer, by the way, let me just move this over. The effect to the viewer is that this room is smaller than a room that has a smaller texture. Let me make this, say, 50. Press Enter after you have typed in the value. Notice now the texture is small and undefined. We need to zoom in order to see it, for example. What that means is that this room appears bigger to the observer. That's just a little trick I noticed. So I'm going to make this 150, press Enter, and that gives us a nice look there. With rotation, if I change the rotation to 45 degrees and I type in the number and then press Enter, you'll notice that the texture has changed its alignment. It might not be too dramatic here, but let's go to this room and let's again select the floor, select the rotation, and make the rotation 45 degrees. Now our tiles have rotated 45 degrees, giving us that kind of effect. We can change this to any value we like. We can make it slightly offset to kill people who have OCD, or we can work on the actual angles. If we make it 90 degrees, we won't see a difference. If we make it 180 degrees, apart from the shading on the flagstones themselves, we don't see a difference. It's only when we go off angle that we start to notice the major difference. Back to our cave now, and we're going to be looking at the colorization options. Now, we have two ways of working with color within our room changer. We have change colors or we have colorize. The default is on change colors. What this does is, as I drag the slider bar for my hue across the spectrum here, it will start to realign the texture basic colors with the new hue relative to the hue. So in other words, if I drag this to, let's say, more of a green tone, what it's doing is it's adding green to the existing texture, and that's actually calculating that it would be purple. If you add green to red, you get a kind of purple color. I can continue to drag it in different directions to get different effects as I so desire. However, the change is always relative to the basic color. So this is our base color on 000. If I were to increase the saturation, which is the next bar, the color will become more intense. If I decrease the saturation, the color will become more muted and shift towards white and gray. So if we want it to be a little bit stronger, let's increase the saturation. And then finally, the luminance value is how bright or dark the texture is that is applied. Note, this is changing the lightness or darkness of all of the elements of that texture. So dark spaces will become gray as we improve this value, as we increase this value. And if we decrease it, dark spaces will become darker. So we can create some very mood-like environments playing around with these values. But let's say, for example, we wanted it to be a completely different color, where we weren't trying to guess what color to use with our change colors option. When we select the colorize option, notice now automatically the texture changes to a flat color. It defaults to red. So now as I move across the color bar, if I'm clicking on the green color, it changes green. There's no question about it. If I click on the blue, it'll change to blue, and so on. Notice that as we choose lighter colors, a lot of the detail is washed out, simply because it's all being changed to that color. There is no relative calculations going on. Darker colors generally tend to preserve some of the original texture, but they are not necessarily clean. The reason for that is that our saturation is at 100%. If I drop the saturation down to 50%, detailing will start to return, but again, that color will start shifting towards gray the closer we get to 0. Lightness and darkness, again, the luminance value, does exactly the same thing. It washes out the color, or it intensifies the color as we increase or decrease it. If I don't want to use the colorize options that I have selected, I simply select change colors again, and it defaults everything back to 0, 0, 0 in the change color option. The colorize option will now have defaulted back to its original 0, 150 value. So that is how we manipulate the actual textures that we're using. I'm just going to change this outer wall to dark soil, for example, and then I'm going to close up that. So we can change the textures of each of these rooms to our heart's desire, changing their size, their scale, and their coloration. But how can we make them look more different from one another? How can we manipulate the rooms themselves? The default wall type is normal, but I have several other options. I have below ground, cave, and advanced. For the theatre, let's start at the bottom. We're going to start with advanced. When I select advanced, notice that immediately we start to get all sorts of different values and different texture options for the outer wall and the inner wall. I'm going to zoom in on this room so we get to see a little bit more as we manipulate that. To do that, I'm holding down Control and then I'm using my scroll wheel to zoom in. So there we go. I'm repositioning us using the slider bars, of course. So there we can see the current room configuration. It is listed as an advanced room. We have our floor texture, we have our outer wall texture, we have shadow, outline, an inner wall texture, and a shadow and an outline. As far as I know, most theatres generally have an inner wall lining that's usually quite appealing. Fabric, for example, or heavy drapes. Maybe that's something that we want to use here to indicate that. So if I now select the inner wall and I select the texture, I might not want to use an existing texture. I might want it just to be a flat color. So now in my texture option, instead of selecting texture, I select color. This brings up my color wheel. And of course I can select, let's say, red. Let's make the luminance value a little bit darker to create a more intimate space. And I'm happy with the saturation and with the current color itself. So by selecting the advanced wall type, I can control the color of the wall on the inner and the outer. So characters walking outside would see a wooden wall, and on the inside, they would then see this red carpet lining it. It can be really useful. But I have some other options too, shadow and outline. If I select the shadow on the outer wall, notice what happens. The entire shadow is gone. The wall no longer casts a shadow, and the wall now feels fairly flat. There's very little depth to it. The outline is now clearly visible. That's the dark outline around the edge of the room. I can deselect that as well. The room now looks, if I deselect it, as if it's perhaps cut into the actual stage itself, as if we could walk down into that room like a sunken garden. That's not the effect we want to achieve, however, and we can further change it by deselecting the shadow inside the room. Now we have this strange black outline, and that's coming from the outline that we still have selected. Deselect the outline, and now it looks as if perhaps we have a room, but that room doesn't have a very high wall and is more flush with the stage than anything else. And again, we can come in and we can turn the shadows back on, we can turn the outlines back on. We can really control this to our heart's content. Now it looks like we have some kind of raised dais, again, not necessarily with walls because there's no inner shadow, but it is certainly sitting above the stage floor, indicating we would have to step up to it. All of these fall into the advanced section. Our next wall type is going to be appropriate for this particular shape. This was the cave that we were trying to create. Remember, we called it cave just to remind ourselves. It's slightly organic at the moment, but not particularly cave-like. We select the room, we select wall type, and when we select cave, that allows us to create cave effect. I'm going to deselect the room so you can see the effect itself. The outer wall is now gone. It's not casting a shadow, so it looks as if it is again incised into our stage. We can walk down into this cave, or the cave is actually in the stage itself. The cave wall is no longer smooth, but now it's slightly roughed up, it's beveled. The official term is cave wall intensity, and we have a slider. So I select the room and we can see this cave wall intensity. So it can decrease, which reduces the amount of intensity that we are experiencing, or increase it to its maximum effect. It's entirely up to you how you want to handle this particular effect. If I change the inner wall thickness, however, let's say change it to 12, that effect becomes a lot more exaggerated. And so we might want to actually decrease it as our walls get thicker, just to prevent the shape from being too unnatural. So that's our cave wall type. Then if we go over to, let's say, our throne room, we can select our wall type as being below ground. This achieves a similar effect to what we were getting with the advanced wall type, but it does it automatically and makes it simpler for us. The walls are now indicating that we can go down into this room. There's no outer shadow, there's no outer wall, but we could take steps down into this room. Great for creating sunken spaces, lowered areas within your map to create a sense of depth. Really, really powerful option. So when I select this, I have my options to change the textures as usual, and then I have my wall thickness. So let's talk about wall thickness a little bit when we come to a regular room. The treasure room is still a normal room type. I have my outer wall thickness and my inner wall thickness. When I increase the outer wall thickness, let's say to 12, the outer wall expands from the vertex point into the grid next to or adjacent to it, creating a thicker outer wall. The inner wall and the inner space of the room remains unchanged. If I change the inner wall room to say 12 as well, that now builds into the room away from the vertex point, making the effective surface area of the room smaller. The walls are now much, much thicker, and I can play with any variation I want. I can make the outer walls really, really, really narrow if I want my room calculations to be based on the interior wall space, or I could do the exact opposite where I make this back to 12. Oh, I could make it to 112 if I so desired, but I don't think we need 112. I could make that 12, and I could make the inner wall only 2. So now we're getting maximum floor space within this space. So controlling the widths of your walls can be really useful to indicate an outer wall as opposed to an inner wall, for example. Inner walls tend to be thinner because they're usually only 1 or 2 bricks thick, whereas outer walls are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 feet thick, depending on the nature of your castle. Finally, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about that orange line that I originally referred to when we were talking about moving rooms around. The orange line, when I select it, now brings up a whole lot of options. And these are really, really powerful options. So I'm going to select this orange line here. I move my cursor over it until it goes dark orange, then I left click to select it. I now have wall segment options available to me. We have wall segment type. That's straight, circle, or curved. If I choose circle, the wall immediately bends on a standard circular shape. And I now have 3 vertex points that I can select and manipulate. I don't particularly like this curve. I want it to be more circular. I left click on the orange circle at the apex of the geometric shape, and I can left click and drag that towards my circle shape. Closer I get, the broader the circle. If I go beyond, however, the 2 original vertex points, it inverts the circle, and now I would be incising into my actual room. So I can play around with the depth of that. Of course, I can drag this all the way back this way, outside of the room, even violating the usual rules for segment wall intersections, but create a very shallow wall. So this is a powerful tool in terms of creating any kind of shape that has a specific function. Notice if I select this segment and change this segment to circle, I start to get these strange bulging like shapes. Again, this is just due to the nature of the 3 square by 3 square by 3 squares that have been selected, and the fact that this segment is no longer the same as that. If I marry these 2 vertex points, however, it starts to become a circular chamber. And that's how I can make a circular chamber, by selecting these walls and turning these walls into circles as well, and not changing that central vertex point. So I have now made a circular room. Again, if I left click on the slightly orange circle, I can drag the room around so that I can see what I'm doing. But that is how to create a circular room. The other option that we have when we are dealing with our wall segments is instead of going with circle, we can actually go with curved. Now, curved creates two separate vertex points, unlike the singular one from the circle. These I can again highlight, left click, and then drag to change the shape of the wall itself. I can create some really organic, really strange shapes. Simply by moving around these points, I can create perfect sine waves, or not so perfect sine waves. I can extend it, I can decrease it, I can try and level it out, and achieve almost any kind of shaped wall that I could possibly imagine or need to design for my specific shape. So curves are really useful when it comes to creating dynamic, organic shapes. And it's literally just a case of moving these vertex points around to achieve the shape that you like. If you're not happy with any of the shapes that you've made, whether you don't like the circle or you don't like the curved shape, all you simply do is select the segment again, make sure that you've got the segment highlighted, and then select in the drop-down menu of the segment type, go back to straight, and it will restore it to its original features. Just like that. Back to this vertex point, however, and we want to make some other changes. So perhaps we want the cave effect on the inside of the wall. If I select that, you'll notice that we start getting that little beveling. But the wall is very thin on the inside. If you recall, the wall thickness is only 2 on the inside. I can also make the outside more cave-like. Remember, the outside is 12, and that's why that effect is so dramatically applied just to that section. I find this can be really useful when you are trying to create the look of an old stone wall, the uneven surfaces rather than just the even surfaces. So here, for example, I might just select that for that particular section. We have the option, if I deselect the cave wall, on the inside and the outside, finally we have the option of selecting a segment and then hiding it. So the segment is now hidden. The effect is automatically generated by DungeonFog. The vertex points are rounded around the vertex point, and it now looks as if there might be an entrance into this cave space. Bearing in mind, we do have doors and windows that are a different prop that we can add to our rooms to add doors and windows, so you don't have to do this every time you want to create a door or a window. DungeonFog will do it automatically for you. This is when you want to create large openings or gaps in spaces, and you need to have control over the exact size of that space. So if I select the cave and I select the cave wall and I choose hidden, we can now see that it looks like there's a natural entrance into this cave, perhaps from the outside. Last, but certainly not least, is the ability for us to manipulate the actual wall segments themselves by splitting them. I am going to select this shape here, and I'm going to change it back to a straight line so we can see what's going on. And with the wall segment still selected, I'm going to click Split Wall. What that does is it automatically creates a new wall point, a new vertex point in the middle of our wall, which we can manipulate as we normally can, left-clicking and dragging to move its position, and so on. It now means that this particular wall segment could be turned into a circle, or into any shape we so desire. It also means that it's independent from this one, so now this one could be turned also into a circle, creating a very interesting effect. On the other hand, if we don't want that to take place, if we're not happy with that, we simply select that vertex point again, and we hit the little trash symbol in the top right-hand side of the screen, and that will delete it and restore the segment to how it was originally. We might just need to change it back to being straight first to undo all of the bits and bobs that was going on, and then we select that segment again, turn it back into a circle, and we've restored our circle. But that tool of being able to split the walls is very useful. If I decide that I want to have a small out-jutting here, I would split the wall not once, but I would actually split the next segment as well, and I would then be able to move my points to here. Then I would select the wall again, split it again, and that would allow me to drag it out to there. And in this segment, I need to split again and drag it out to there to create this entranceway style shape. And that is how you use the split wall segment to really change up your rooms once you've created them. Again, select the vertex point. You can either press delete on your keyboard or the little trash can to get rid of these vertex points. Again, it will just cycle through the next vertex point in the line, by the way. So if I'm pressing delete on my keyboard, it will select that last one. So let's restore this back to the way it was. Those are the tools and controls that you have when designing rooms within DungeonFog. I hope you found this tutorial interesting, and return again for more tutorials from DungeonFog. Find those on www.dungeonfog.com. Until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of map making.